All right, class. We are going to get into the second half of the Unit 2 review video. So our goal here is to get through the rest of the questions and also to give you some idea at the end of this video of the types of issues that are fair game when it comes to the long essay, which is more of an argumentative essay. But as far as the short essays are concerned, I'm going through the grading rubrics with you right now, so you've got everything you should need. Now, again, we're going to fast forward through the videos or the slides pretty quickly here to get up where we left off in the last video, and I believe we left off with question number 5. So let's pick up with question number 6. How do the actions taken by the government, internal migration, war service by various groups, and actions of average citizens change the identity of America? So really what we want to make sure we do here is attach action to identity. And how might the way that we redo things, whether that is where people live or opening up, it's called industrial democracy, opening up jobs to people that have been discriminated against, how that's going to change the way people view themselves and how they view the United States. So what we want to look at here are Liberty Bonds, the Committee on Public Information, industrial democracy, the 18th Amendment, Espionage, Sabotage, and Sedition Acts, and the Antiradical Crusades. Now, what we want to make sure that we pick up with here on the Liberty Bonds and the like, we want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time on, again, this idea of government intervention. So people are being asked to pitch in. People are being asked to be involved. And to buy Liberty Bonds, for example, it was voluntary, didn't have to do it. Sounds similar to what we talked about in question 5, doesn't it? And this Committee on Public Information, this one is perhaps one of the bigger issues. Talk about changing your identity. The fact that the government is now going to be involved with propaganda. Now, let's kind of play both sides of this coin. Remember, on one hand, you're in a war. You're in a war to win it. Losing the war would be catastrophic to the United States. So yeah, we all need to be on board, all for one and one for all, kind of the Three Musketeers going on here. But the idea that the government is going to be trying to persuade you to be in favor of the war, when ultimately that is a political stance in a democracy, you kind of cross a little bit of a barrier here. So, Liberty Bonds, hey, buy them or don't. We'll give you a little pin if you do, a little bit of peer pressure that everyone else has got a pin. Why don't you have one? I had some of those in the cabinet in my room. This is a little bit more problematic, though, in terms of how we view our government and what a government should be doing and what might be crossing the line. You have industrial democracy. This idea of you're opening up. In World War II, we think of Rosie the Riveter. Women are entering the workforce and doing industrial jobs that long had been denied to them by discrimination. Quite frankly, World War I is the first time we really see Rosie the Riveter. There weren't as many Rosie the Riveters as there will be in World War II, but there were some. So women are getting jobs they were at one time discriminated against. In fact, that's exactly what this picture is down here. Women working on what was seen as man's work before that. You also see a larger number of African Americans and Hispanic Americans getting jobs in factories that they had one time been discriminated against. So this idea that, hey, we need to expand the base. We need to bring people into the economy that have been denied that because of need. You put 4 million people in the Army. That's 4 million males, mostly white, that are not in the job force anymore. So who's going to fill that role? Who's going to fill that need? So you need to have them in. Well, when the war's over, hey, don't you still need me? If it was patriotic to let me do this stuff during war, why is it not patriotic during peace? So this is going to open the door for more discussions about civil rights during the 1920s, just like there's more discussions about civil rights in the 1950s, right after World War II. Both of them are heavily connected to this idea of Rosie the Riveter in World War II or industrial democracy from World War I. For the 18th Amendment, we've been talking a lot about amendments lately, haven't we? Whether it's the women's right to vote, which you're going to give in partial relationship to that, whether it's, in the progressive era, direct election of U.S. senators. Well, now you're seeing prohibition creep into the discussion. And again, prohibition, this idea that we're going to limit alcohol. And that's part of this war. Part of the war effort is going to be finally bringing about prohibition, which has been in discussions within American history. You have to go back to the 1830s with the temperance movement connected to the Second Great Awakening. So that's been around for a long time. It isn't like people just woke up one day and went, let's ban alcohol. The Espionage and Sedition Acts, Espionage, Sabotage, and Sedition Acts, these are, now on one hand, this sounds very sensible. Espionage and sabotage, man, if you're going to be involved with subverting the United States and working on behalf of enemy powers, well, of course, that's in the Constitution. You can't do that. So the idea here is pretty simple. And this is going to be an easy one to get behind. It's the Sedition Acts that we know from our classroom discussion that causes a problem. You could argue, what about your freedom of speech? If I want to say and write a letter to the editor and say war is wrong, if I want to stand in front of a congregation and say turn the other cheek, war is wrong, don't go to war, you could be arrested for that in World War I. So there's a big discussion about freedom of speech, just like the Committee on Public Information is trying to present a single view propaganda. Here you're trying to shut down other people's propaganda. The government gets to say what it wants, but you necessarily don't if you disagree with the government. And anti-radical crusades, whether you're rounding up the IWW members, whether you're rounding up people that didn't want to fight against Germany, or people that had sounded German or seemed to be sympathetic to Germany, there were lynchings of German Americans during this time. And there's, actions against people who could have been communist. There's the beginnings of what we're going to call the Red Scare, which we'll get into a lot more in the 1920s. So the idea here is, kind of look at these and be able to discuss them. Notice they're pretty much all in red. They're proper nouns. So there's something that you could also use on the long essay as well. Question number 7. How did the Treaty of Versailles in Article X, or Article 10, create a debate within the United States on the role of government and its role, the government's role in international affairs? Well, there's only 2 real things here to get through, although the second one's quite long. This idea of Wilson's 14 points are to create peace without victory. The problem, of course, is, go back to a previous question, England has lost 800,000 soldiers dead. France is at 1 million soldiers dead. France and Great Britain want to come back from the Treaty of Versailles and hold up a victory plaque and say, we won. This wasn't for nothing, and look at what we won. So the idea behind this is very simple. They feel the need to bring back something that proves they won, and by definition, Germany has to lose. Well, Wilson wants to do more peace without victory. If we have a way to have a scorecard and say you won and you lost, the losers are going to want revenge, and that will breed discontent, and that will breed a future war, and Wilson will be correct in his reading of that history. And in many ways, we see a direct connection between World War I and World War II. Now let's look at the Treaty of Versailles, a good proper noun for the long essay. Now, you don't have to memorize A through F. If you knew a few of them, it would be great. The way I always remember it is it's Wilson's 14 points only applied to Germany. So Germany loses land to France, Denmark, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. German colonies are going to have their boundaries reassigned, but to Great Britain and France. You're going to have a limitation of armaments for Germany, as the German army only is limited to 100,000. You're going to have the German Air Force and U-boats are eliminated. Freedom of the seas, only as it relates to German aggression. They're also going to have to pay for all property damage to France and Belgium, and all loss of lives and the cost of war-related injuries. They have to pay for it all. This alone is going to all but bankrupt Germany into the future. And then finally, F, they have to accept guilt. Germany has to accept World War I was their fault. They caused it. They started it. It was the way they fought it. It's all their fault. And that's not true. There's no way F is remotely true. But that's something that they have to accept. And then that Article X, this is the Treaty of Versailles. This is the only part of Wilson's 14 points that make it in. You're going to have a League of Nations, Article 10, Article X. However, it includes that Three Musketeers clause, all for one and one for all. If any single country is attacked, all the other countries will respond and defend that country. The argument is that would end war. That also means Congress no longer has the authority to declare or not declare war. That comes from the treaty or the League of Nations through the Treaty of Versailles because of a vote that's taken in some conference room in Switzerland. So who gets to declare war? Who gets to decide if American soldiers go and fight and die? And how much money we're going to spend? Is it America that gets to decide that, or is it some bureaucrats and diplomats in Switzerland? So that's the part that Senator Lodge is going to be against, and you did a reading on that. Question number 8. How did Wilson's 14 points call for a new world order? How might his plan meet with some resistance from Europe in light of our military contribution? Here's, again, Wilson's 14 points. And notice, man, we keep coming back to this 14 points. Must be a reason for that. Abolish secret treaties, freedom of the seas, removal of economic barriers, reduction of armies and navies, adjustment of colonial claims, and a League of Nations. Now, again, from Europe's standpoint, why would they agree to this? I mean, France and Great Britain are going to give up or readjust their colonial claims. France and Great Britain are going to open their colonies up to anybody, including companies from Germany or Austria or Hungary. Why should they get equal access to British colonies and French colonies? So they're not going to want to do this. They're not going to want to have this. And as a result of that, if everyone were to agree to this, winners and losers, you would have peace without victory. This essentially is only going to be given to Germany. Germany will have to have freedom of the seas. Germany is going to have reduction of armies and navies or outright elimination of them. Germany will have to adjust their colonial claims by giving it to France and Great Britain. So this is going to be hoisted upon Germany, but not anybody else. So why didn't France and Great Britain want to agree to this and have peace without victory, and Italy? They had lost too much. They felt the need to go back. You can't get off the train if you're the French prime minister and you've lost 1 million Frenchmen and say, my fellow Frenchmen, congratulations, we all accept blame for this. It was all our fault. It was everyone's fault. That's not going to go over well. So, the United States showing up and contributing the least and then saying we should have peace without victory, that's just not going to fly very well. Now, after another, 40, 50, 60 million people die in World War II, they're going to be more open to this idea of maybe we just need to end war, or at least do things differently. So we will come back to this 14 points. We call it the Atlantic Charter in World War II. So there are a lot of connections here. There's a reason we keep coming back to this. Hey, last question. How did economic and social unrest help redefine the culture of urban cities by the end of the First World War, World War I? Which fears do you think caused the greatest unrest? Identify 5 and defend your ranking. So let's look at the complete list. And there's a lot more than 5 things in here. Notice I said, give me your top 5. You don't have to go do them all. Give me what you think are your top 5. And all of these would fit by somebody, by some group, this would describe their fears. For other groups, it would describe their wants and needs. So the post-war fears, you've got workers who worked in war plants. We're not going to need those war plants anymore. Are they still going to have jobs? You've got employers who had these great government contracts that don't exist anymore. Are their companies going to stay around? You've got radicals that now feel like they've got a target on them because there's going to be this Red Scare and people are afraid of communism, and there's going to be that anti-radical movement with like the IWW. Returning veterans, I'm unemployed now. and somebody was working my job in the factory. So do I get my job back? Black veterans, hey, they're coming back and saying, hey, wait a minute, I was fighting and people I know died or I was injured in defending this country for freedom. Remember with Russia dropping out, it's the democracies versus the kingdoms. Hey, we're fighting for freedom here. When do I get freedom at home? So, veterans and some African-American veterans are also returning home realizing they don't have a job, so they kind of fit in both categories. You have conservatives that fear the growth in government, and is this growth permanent? Fear over strikes. I mean, you've got steel strikes and coal strikes and police strikes. Governments, parts of city governments are going out on strike. Over 4 million people went out on strike in a short period of time, and that's when we only had about 150 million people in the United States. I mean, that's substantial. And when you have strikes in coal, everything ran off coal. We generated electricity off coal. We ran power plants off coal that also included how we powered our factories. Steel is what everything was made out of. You have a steel strike and the railroad industry shuts down. You have a coal strike and the railroad industry shuts down. So, I mean, this is, man, everywhere you look, people seem to be angry. And remember, the communist revolution started through strikes. Is this the start of a communist uprising? You have a Red Scare and fear of radicals within the United States. And again, that kind of comes up, radicals we talked about up here as well. But you get Sacco and Vanzetti in very short order. You get the A. Mitchell Palmer raids where he's illegally and without search warrants raiding people and deporting people without trial because they might be communists or radicals or anarchists. You get the American Socialist Party is now under a microscope. Those socialists that in our first unit wanted government to get big but not too big, those are your progressives. Socialists wanted government to get big and just a little bit bigger than the progressives wanted. Well, now they're seen as possible communists. And then you get black nationalism and industrial democracy. Lots of people who had been discriminated against, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, are all saying, hey, you needed us during the war. What about needing us during times of peace? If this is about democracy and freedom and opportunity, then what happens when the war's over? And why don't I get that freedom and opportunity anymore? And you have people like Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois. We talked about him in the progressive era. He's still around, still active. You have race riots like the ones in Chicago of returning veterans saying, hey, why can't I live where I want to live, work where I want to work, and shop where I want to shop? As we're going to have a lot of gender and ethnic debates in the 1920s. So get ready. That's going to be something that we come to. All right, we've reached the end of our review, not the studying of. You should be doing that on your own, but the review of these questions. Now, a few big picture items. Obviously, as we look at World War I, we can ask questions and argument questions. I'm thinking of that long essay of like the causes of World War I versus the Treaty of Versailles. Did the Treaty of Versailles do a good job or a bad job addressing the causes? You could talk about the Treaty of Versailles versus Wilson's 14 points. Which of them would have been a better solution to the problem and why? You could talk about the growth in American government and, was it good? Was it proper? You are fighting a war. You have to streamline. You need the production and supply chaining. You need a source of revenue, taxes. And you have to get people to buy into this. I mean, you're at war. To lose would be catastrophic. So, of course, the government's going to have more power. Was it an appropriate amount? Was it not enough? Was it too much? Kind of a three bears scenario. So there's a lot of more than the progressive era. I think there's more potential here of trying to equate A versus B. And it can be the causes of World War I versus the Treaty of Versailles. It could be, the Article 10 and Wilson's 14 points versus the Treaty of Versailles. It could be the growth in government. Was it too much? Not enough? Just right? And then you could also have a discussion about how various people responded and how different parts of America were in favor of the war or different parts of America were against the war and why. And did one side have a better argument than the other, even though they both had valid points? So those are some of the things that we could also address. So this is it. We're done with our the second half of this review. Good luck.